What are the most significant challenges to operationalizing the kind of reforms you have outlined for us today? A lot of the reforms that we're going to be pushing for this year are at the state level. How do you drive those reforms down to the district level so that they make it into the schools and into the classrooms? And what does it take to meet and overcome these challenges? And then we would like for you to say a few words about how can the reforms be implemented in rural areas? What are the unique challenges of rural districts and the strategies to overcome them? Let's start with Ben. Because of LPV, we need to come to the mic.
Okay, so we're doing both questions?
Yes.
All right. Implementation and rural. Implementation, two thoughts on parent trigger as it relates to implementation. The first is that parent trigger is, in some ways, an insurance policy. It's an insurance policy to make sure that the reforms that you do at the state level actually get implemented on the ground with parents. And by that I mean that, parent trigger's gotten a lot of attention. It's obviously radical, but in some ways it's not radical at all. Because all it's doing is giving parents the power to tell districts to do what they're already mandated to do under federal law, which is turn around failing schools. And so the first thing I would say about implementation is that parent trigger is an insurance policy against reforms being watered down or not even implemented at all. All that being said, parent trigger itself has huge implementation challenges. One on organizing, the second on school turnarounds. In terms of organizing, we've built out one of the most, I think, sophisticated grassroots organizing teams anywhere in America when it comes to education reform. Our lead organizer is an old school union organizer, literally started organizing in the early 70s with Cesar Chavez. He's been an organizer for SEIU, he's a state director on the Obama campaign, national field director for Earth Day. And so we really have developed incredibly sophisticated organizing strategies and tactics, with the North Star being empowering parents to give them power of the education of their own children. And in the 2 years since we have had a parent trigger law in California, we've had 2 schools, 1,300 parent trigger eligible schools, 2 schools where parents have announced that they're over 50%. And that is partly because the defenders of the status quo are powerful and they have lists. I come from mostly Democratic politics. I've worked on 5 Democratic presidential campaigns, and if you tell me a campaign where one campaign has the voter file and the other campaign doesn't, I'll tell you which campaign is going to win. And so when you're organizing parents, you don't have the voter file. You just have to do it old school, through house meetings, through knocking on doors. And parents are beginning to do that, and we're getting better at it. But the first, and you're doing that in the face of threats, intimidation, and harassment from the defenders of the status quo, who seem to have very few moral lines that they will not cross. All that being said, we're making a lot of progress, getting a lot better, and getting a lot better not at us doing the organizing, but at parents doing the organizing. Second is on implementation. The parents at Desert Trails, in some ways, all Parent Trigger does is clear away the obstacles to change, but it doesn't provide the roadmap. We have to all figure that out collectively ourselves. It's been a fascinating experience. When parents told us that they didn't want an outside charter operator, they wanted to figure out radical kids first in-district reform. Parents want to be able to hire the principal. They want that principal to be able to manage the staff, manage the curricula, and manage the budget. So I just got on the phone and started calling people who are a lot smarter than I am about all this stuff. And when I was talking to people at think tanks whose job it is to think, I would, basically say, look, parents now have all this power. And, Kids First agenda up until quite recently has been kind of a theoretical construct, because even if you're lucky enough to have a Joel Klein or a Governor Jindal, they still have to get it through the legislature, implement it in the district bureaucracy, get school boards, et cetera, to agree to all of those reforms. With Parent Trigger, you bypass all that. And so, guys, this is a super cool moment. You get to dust off all of your great Kids First proposals that were really neat, really good for kids, but had no political chance of becoming a reality, and now they do. And the collective answer was, well, we have some thoughts on this, but there is no playbook. And I think that is partly a result of the fact that we've all become a little bit intellectually lazy. We've never really been confronted with, in a pure environment where parents have radical power, what would you do with that power to make life better for their kids? So now we are. We have to all collectively figure that out together, and the parents at Desert Trails Elementary are doing that. On the rural issue, Desert Trails is in the middle of nowhere. At least I grew up in Venice Beach. Desert Trails is in the Mojave Desert. And the thing that has been most fascinating for me, there certainly are challenges inherent to rural communities. One is that we are going to have to recruit a great principal and a bunch of great teachers to come teach at a school in the middle of the Mojave Desert where it's really hot. And we're working very closely with Teach for America. They're quite engaged both in recruiting a leader for the school as well as staff. But what surprised me the most was how many things we had in common. And I think part of what this movement is making clear is that parents who look really different have a lot in common with each other. That parents are organizing across racial lines, across geographic lines, across socioeconomic lines, and recognizing that while there are certainly differences, we have a whole lot more in common with each other than we do with the defenders of the status quo. So in relation to rural versus urban, there are certainly differences, certainly challenges, but I think there's a lot more, we have a lot more in common with each other than we do things that differentiate us. Thanks.
For the sake of time, I'm just going to address the rural issue because it's near and dear to my heart. One of the things that we have to understand as a room is that we have a moral, and I would argue a legal obligation to ensure that children in small rural communities have the same equity of opportunity that students have in large urban districts, and somehow we have forgotten that. And often I hear in Arkansas, right, that, well, you can't put a charter school in that town because the school district's already struggling. It's too small. You know, that town cannot hold 2 schools. It's great in a bigger city, the classrooms are overfilling, but let's understand this. When comments like that are made, what we're basically saying is students who grow up in a rural geography are less entitled to choice, that their parents don't have the right to choose. And what's happened in small rural communities is often that, particularly along the Delta, and I imagine it's true in Louisiana, that the small Delta communities have been losing population and they're going to fight for to keep every single student. And they think they're entitled to serve the children just because they were born there. And we have to get rid of the notion that any school district is entitled to serve children, and we have to argue hard for the fact that regardless of geography, students deserve an opportunity to choose a school. And to that end, I mean, we run 900 miles of buses, of bus routes a day to make sure that the child who does not have transportation, who lives in the most remote country place, has an opportunity to attend our school. And that's what it's really about. And I would say, if you're in a small rural community and you're not prepared to transport students, you're self-selecting your students, and that's problematic. So often we have to go, we can't use those things that we don't have the level of philanthropy, we don't have the level of public transportation, we don't have we can't attract good teachers. That does not alleviate our responsibility to give students in rural communities the same opportunity that they would have in an urban community. So I challenge the community here. There's no reason, and I'm looking at a map because it's fun. I used to make the students learn all the parishes, but I'm looking at the map. There's no reason West Carroll, East Carroll, Madison, Concordia, St. Landria, Acadia, St. Mary, Iberia, there's no reason that all of these parishes and the students in them don't deserve choice.
So really briefly, I'm just going to hit the first question, if that's okay. These are themes you've heard throughout. But 2 points to make here. One is that, and the question again is, what does it take to implement this stuff well? The first is political capital. In New York, we have a mayor who's willing to spend political capital on this. He's done it for 2.5 terms. He's going to keep doing it until he leaves office. His question consistently is, what's next? What are we doing next to make sure that we've got every child in a quality school, every child with a quality teacher? And so that's what it takes. It takes political courage, it takes vision, and it takes perseverance, first and foremost. And that really is the enabler. I would say it is necessary but not sufficient. And really, as in anything, implementation is about talent. It's about finding people like Scott who have a vision and are willing to essentially, if I understand correctly, Scott, build a transportation infrastructure for students, 900 miles a day of transportation for his kids to get to school. I mean, that is it right there. And whether you're in the middle of Arkansas or the middle of Harlem, that kind of vision and that kind of determination, again, whether you're a school leader, whether you're a Teach for America core member, and I think we have some here today, whether you're a New Leaders for New Schools leader, starting a school or taking over an existing school, you've got to have folks who believe in it, who wake up every day and want it, and above them or around them, you've got to have policymakers and decision makers who are willing to clear the way.
What we're going to do now is ask questions of each specific panelist, and we'll start with Marc. And Marc, we have a question here. Why is talent so critical to transforming our education system? And please talk about the system you are using in New York to develop school leaders.
Yeah, in 2003, when the mayor and Joel were just getting started on the new school work, they essentially put out an RFP, an all-call, to anyone in New York City who wanted to start a school, and they were willing to take a shot on this 29-year-old Baton Rouge native to get something started on the Evander Childs campus in the Bronx. And since then, we have done that several hundred times over on the thesis that, again, if we have policymakers who are willing to create space for educators to come in and be creative and drive to an outcome and be held accountable serving the same students who have failed before to produce better outcomes now, then the leaders will come. New York City, with John's leadership, made deep investments in partnerships with the likes of Teach for America, and I speak today as an alum of Teach for America, a 1995 core member in the Bronx. So deep investments in human capital pipelines that have really transformed the landscape of teaching in so many classrooms across New York City and across the country. So Teach for America, the New Teacher Project, New Leaders for New Schools, the charter movement. I mean, the charter movement is in New York City. We have authorized and cited nearly 150 charter schools in the last 8 years. And these are engines of human capital development. We love working with KIPP in New York City and fight tooth and nail with them to open more schools faster. In fact, Scott, what do you think, New York City? We push our charter operators to open more schools faster because we know that they are good at developing and attracting talent, shaping that talent around a school, which is a delivery mechanism for a vision of how students can learn. And KIPP in particular is a delivery mechanism that has produced outrageous results. So between our investments and partnerships in City Year and Teach for America, New Leaders for New Schools, and our investment in a new school strategy, including charter management organizations that are just good at it, that is what New York City has done, and that I think has driven much of the movement and achievement that you've seen in New York City.
Okay, the next question is going to be for Ben. We would like to know who rallied in the California experience to support the parent trigger law. How did it gain widespread support? Who opposed it, and how did you overcome the opposition? And then lastly, is there data to back up the effectiveness of the parent trigger?
So I'll do the second question first. The answer is no. So there you go. Parent trigger has never been used before. It's a brand new law. The way to think about parent trigger is that it sort of clears away the obstacles for change and gives parents real power to negotiate on behalf of their kids. And parents, as we all know, have different incentive structures, different sense of urgency, but also have a deep responsibility to educate themselves in terms of how best to use that power on behalf of their kids. And so, he said, I think there are the beginnings of what a kids first agenda looks like, a pure kids first agenda, especially within the context of a district school and a unionized school. We know that it can be done, but there are a lot of obstacles, some of which are political, some of which are data-driven public policy obstacles. So we are working in real time to overcome those obstacles, and whether it's a district school or a charter school, the parents at the first parent trigger school, Desert Trails, will open up a newly transformed kids first school next September. In terms of passing the parent trigger, it was really a once in a lifetime moment that won't probably be repeated. The first person that was absolutely critical to passing the parent trigger was President Obama. We came up with this idea in early 2009 and just put a video on our website. That's all we did. The video said, if you organize half the parents at your school, we'll guarantee you a great school. It was not very well thought out. But it led to grassroots organizing all across Los Angeles around that incredibly simple idea. While that was happening, President Obama announced his Race to the Top initiative. And so all of a sudden, for the first time in California history, hopefully not the last, but maybe, we had a legislature that was deeply incentivized to do something really good for kids. And so we went knocking on doors with a band of parents in Sacramento, peddling this idea, and I think most people thought we were crazy. But a few Democrats gave us the political cover to move this. Mayor Villaraigosa in Los Angeles, Mayor Kevin Johnson in Sacramento, Senator Gloria Romero, the state senator and a sponsor of the legislation, and it began to get traction. We had a mantra that we still hold true today, which is don't play on the other side's home turf. If you are sitting in a closed-door room with lobbyists, you're losing. Our home turf is community organizing and the marketplace of ideas. And so when we organized to pass the parent trigger, we flooded Sacramento with parents. And not just random parents. I think the education reform community too often, and I've been a part of this, too often goes into low-income communities, tells parents this bill is good or this bill is bad, wear this t-shirt and cheer when we say cheer. And That's not what Parent Trigger is about, because it's not esoteric. It's not theoretical. Every single parent who organizes around Parent Trigger understand its impact, the power it gives them to advocate for their own children. So the parents who went to Sacramento were different. They were incredibly sophisticated, and I think this was shocking to many of the legislators they testified before. And we had newspapers weighed in a powerful way as well. We had 41 positive editorials in California alone about Parent Trigger, and that pressured the legislature to pass the Parent Trigger by one vote in the Assembly and one vote in the Senate. And it was, even with all of that, it was a Herculean effort. I got a call in the middle of the night while this was all happening from the president of the state Senate in California, a progressive Democrat. And he said, you know, this is kind of crazy. He said a few weeks ago nobody had ever heard of Parent Trigger, and now it is dominating politics in Sacramento. And he goes, his exact words were, he said, I've seen you guys as ragtag band of parents, but Sacramento has been flooded with lobbyists trying to stop this. And he said the only reason they haven't been able to stop it is because they can't think of any logical argument against it. And I think that's a really critical lesson. When we have legislators, when we have leaders who are willing to stand up, stand with parents, and do the right thing, they can't do it alone. We need to give them the political cover to do it. And we are in one of those moments right now when ideas matter. It's not always like this, but it's like that right now. We need to seize that moment, take advantage of this moment, and not be timid. I think Chancellor Klein said, let's be bold. So let's give parents power, not watered down power, no, it's the right thing to do. Let's give our legislators the political cover to do it, and we can get it done.
Thank you, Ben. This will be the last question, and this one will be directed to Scott. Scott, you are a very successful leader in the charter school movement. You've done an incredibly good job with the KIPP charter schools in the Delta region of Arkansas. We would like to know, what are the most important tools you have as a charter school operator that help you to succeed, and how can these tools be offered in traditional public schools? Because we know also that at the end of the day, we will still have many traditional public schools throughout Louisiana, and we need them to be successful along with charter schools. So how do we to take the success that you're having with our charter schools and and offer this to the traditional public school system?
Great question. Thank you. So KIPP, Knowledge is Power program, has 5 pillars that we hold dear. And those 5 pillars are high expectations, which can be instituted at any public school, regardless of size, shape, style. It's just holding your students to account for rigorous academics. And the second key pillar is more time, that our students go to school longer. They go to school during Saturdays. They go to school during summer. More homework, more quality time. So that's a lever that's easily put in place, I think, for public schools. The third, choice and commitment. Obviously, a lot of what people have talked about is the fact that parents and students deserve a choice. The last 2 are focus on results and power to lead. Power to lead is the one I want to spend a little more time on. One of the things that's critical, when I first got to Helena, Arkansas, we started with just 5th grade. I hired 3 teachers, and people said, how are you ever going to get people to this small Delta town where people are moving away? Well, today we employ over 120 people. And a large part of the reason we've been able to do that is because we have a waiver on teacher certification. And I think we have to bring down a lot of those barriers and make sure that we've got to do everything in our power to make sure we bring the most talented people to the Delta. And if there are barriers in place that prevent us from bringing in the right talent, that's a huge problem. So I encourage people in this state to make sure, particularly where the odds are the toughest for some of our children, that's where we need the most flexibility, and often it works in the opposite way. Someone mentioned Title I earlier today, and obviously Title I money has a lot of restrictions around it. And we need to bring down some of those restrictions and make sure that we have the flexibility to do what we want to do. The other one, which I don't know how you implement, but it's really important, is if you look around a lot of small towns, everyone has an independent school board, and every school board is vying for power and moving left and right. We're very fortunate to be able to function with a 501c3 nonprofit board. And so even though our geography runs from Helena to Blytheville, and we'll add multiple communities there, we're under one board, and we're able to draw talent from all over the state to have a board. So my sort of radical idea of the day is that changing that structure so that school districts aren't necessarily geographically based, but leadership based. So there's nothing that would prevent one school district from serving students who are 300-400 miles apart, because the structures can exist that way. And we have the capability. We have one finance director that serves both schools, which are, well, all 4 of our schools, and again, the spread between them is over 100 miles. So bringing down those traditional geographic boundaries that I think limit how we scale.